we're headed. So this evening's event is hosted by Level Up California and the Cal RCV Coalition. Level Up California is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make positive change across the state of California. We believe in a results-oriented and not left, not right, but forward approach to politics. We focus on data and solutions, and we support initiatives, candidates, and ideas that will benefit all Californians. And the California RCV Coalition is also a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization formed just last year. Cal RCV's mission is to give more Californians the choice to use ranked choice voting by supporting local campaigns and building the groundwork for statewide adoption of ranked choice voting. They focus on initiatives and educational opportunities to spread awareness about ranked choice voting. So with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Sean, to introduce Level Up California's educational initiative, Policy Nerd Nights, and what to expect tonight. Take it away, Sean.
Thanks, Sarah. Policy Nerd Nights are an ongoing series of educational events hosted by Level Up California. We bring in events from across the nation to share their knowledge, amplifying the voice of those on the front lines of both advocacy and analysis. Unless otherwise stated, the appearance of guests in Policy Nerd Nights events is not considered an endorsement of their campaigns, platforms, organizations, or beliefs. It's a strictly nonpartisan event. Moreover, guests are not assumed to endorse us nor any other speakers in events in which they participate.
Tonight, we are here as promised to talk about ranked choice voting. So thank you so much. And with that, let's roll into this incredible conversation about ranked choice voting. So back to you, Sean.
Yeah, so tonight we worked with the Cal RCV, California's Ranked Choice Voting Coalition, to bring you a wonderful group of panelists who will break down what ranked choice voting is and show us what a future with RCV could look like. Harnessing their unique perspectives, these panelists, by the way, during the panel, if you have any questions on ranked choice voting, feel free to drop them into the chat as a message. There's a person, star Q&A, Guy Camilleri, that's Guy Camilleri, our Q&A guy. Our host will answer the questions as we can, time permitting. Anyway, I'm super pleased to have ranked choice voting expert Tom Charron, co-founder of Cal RCV, as our moderator for tonight. I guess I'll just hand it over to Tom to introduce our panelists.
Sean, thank you so much. Sarah, thank you as well. Really looking forward to tonight's conversation and really excited to have a really dynamic panel of absolute experts in ranked choice voting. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So first, let me introduce our panel. I'm going to start off with Maria Perez. So Maria is, she's born and raised in Ecuador. She immigrated to the US in the 1990s to pursue her education. She's crafted a career guided by her passion to address social disparities. A seasoned nonprofit leader, organizer, facilitator, advocate, educator, and coalition builder, Maria is a firm believer in the power of people coming together to address complex social problems. She spent over 10 years as a healthcare practitioner before turning to policy, equity, and advocacy work, which she's been doing for the past 8 years. She served as campaign lead and later as interim hub manager for the California Endowment's project Building Healthy Communities in East Oakland, director of Fair Vote New Mexico, and more recently as campaign manager for Common Cause New Mexico. She's a national expert on the issue of ranked choice voting, and she believes that democracy is the ultimate health equity indicator. She founded the firm Democracy Action, which works at the intersection of equity and democracy in 2019. Welcome, Maria, and thanks for spending some time here with us tonight.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be here.
Let me next introduce Rob Richie. Rob has been the leader of Fair Vote since co-founding the organization in 1992 and was named president and CEO in 2018. He's been involved in helping to develop, win, and implement ranked choice voting in states and more than 20 cities, fair representation voting systems in numerous Voting Rights Act cases, the National Popular Vote Plan in 16 states, and voter access proposals like voter pre-registration and automatic voter registration. Rob is a frequent media source and has been a guest on CNBC, CNN, C-SPAN's Washington Journal, NPR's All Things Considered, NBC, On the Media, and Freakonomics. His writings have appeared in every major national publication, including the opinion pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, as well as in 11 books, including as co-author of Every Vote Equal, which is about electoral college reform, and Whose Votes Count, which is about fair representation voting. He's addressed conventions of the American Political Science Association, the National Association of Counties, the National Association of Secretaries of State, and the National Conference of State Legislatures. Rob, it's great to have you here as well.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
All right. And last but certainly not least, Andrew Yang. Andrew is an author, former political candidate, nonprofit founder. He is best known for being a candidate in the 2020 Democratic Party presidential primaries and in the 2021 New York City Democratic mayoral primary. He became a prominent candidate in the 2020 presidential primaries. His signature policy was a universal basic income of $1,000 a month as a response to job displacement by automation. He's been credited with popularizing the idea of universal basic income through his candidacy and activism. And by the way, I'm looking forward to him helping popularize ranked choice voting with activism as well.
And me both, Tom.
News out. Yeah,
UBI,
absolutely.
RCV.
Yeah, we're
prosperity,
excited.
hopefully.
We're super excited to have you here. And last thing I want to say about you, Andrew, is in October last year, you founded the Forward Party, which we're also excited about. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring us to our first topic, which is the basics of ranked choice voting. Got to talk about what this reform is. And in order to get into that, Rob, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about what our current voting system is and why we believe that it's in need of change.
Well, thanks. I suspect we have a bunch of people on this call who already come in realizing that being limited to a single choice, being limited to a single representative is not really in keeping with what we are as Americans today. And certainly doesn't give us the politics that we deserve and the representation that we need. So in California, but really across a lot of the country, when you go to the polls, you get a single tick, like you get to put one. And if there's only two choices, hey, you've voted for one and you haven't voted for the other. But if there's more than two, you're leaving information on the table. You're not able to say something more than what you might than just one choice. But that's what we're generally limited to. California basically has two systems that it uses in local government and state and federal elections. One is where you just get to vote for one no matter how many people run. So if like 18 people are running, you vote for one and you can't say anything more. And the one with the most votes wins, and that could be like 18%, and everyone else has support someone with less, and then that candidate wins even though 82% voted for someone else. Or you have a runoff election, then the top two primary where you vote for one in that kind of big field, and then two candidates advance, not necessarily the two most representative candidates, but the two who finish at the top of that heap. And then there's a runoff, and that's where more people vote in California, but there's only two people, not necessarily reflecting the diversity of views. And across the state, at least in state legislative and congressional level, there's only one person representing each area. The California Redistricting Commission, it does a lot of things well, but is sort of indicative of the situation where there's, they created congressional districts, and the closest district in a partisanship out of all the 50 plus districts that they drew is one that's almost a 10% margin between the two major parties, and all the rest are bigger, and most of them a lot bigger, which sort of suggests the kind of competition that will not be allowed, in addition to the challenges in representing California's diversity. So we think there can be something better, and that we're about to hear some good ideas for how to do that.
Thank you, Rob. Maria, can you give us a brief intro of what ranked choice voting is and how it works?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So, I mean, Rob kind of mentioned this, right? Ranked choice voting is just a simple change to the way that voters experience their time with their ballot. So instead of just marking one candidate as the one that you want to win, and ergo everybody else you want them to lose, you have an opportunity as a voter to express your vote in a more nuanced way, where you can pick who your favorite candidate is. Maybe it's somebody who you know personally, or somebody who is has a proven record of being a great public servant, and you really want to support this person. Maybe it's somebody you really align with, and you volunteer for their campaign, or be what it may be. You have a favorite, you rank that person as your favorite candidate. But in case your favorite candidate is not popular enough with the whole electorate to actually win, as a voter, you have a chance to indicate who your backup choices are, so that in case your favorite candidate doesn't win, your vote doesn't just go to waste. As long as you rank your backup choices, your vote is still in play, and it will count towards who gets elected. And the way this works on sort of like the counting of the votes part of it is, once everybody's votes are in and the polls close, then the voting machines count everybody's first choice votes, and only your first choice vote. If one of those candidates wins with majority of the vote, or a relative majority, we'll get into how this works if you're electing more than one winner, then the election is over and that person is declared the winner. But if nobody reaches that winning threshold, what happens is that the candidate with the least amount of support is eliminated, and the voters who chose that candidate now have their vote count for the next preference on their ballot. So that's what I was saying. Even if your favorite can't win, your vote's still at play. That's what it means. If your favorite is eliminated because just nobody liked them that much, your vote as a person who chose that candidate still counts for the next candidate on your ballot. And this process continues by rounds until one of the candidates does reach that threshold, that winning threshold, and is declared the winner.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. That's, I think, a really concise way to talk about what ranked choice voting does. And of course, it can get more involved and more complex to talk about, and we'll get into more details as the conversation goes on. But Andrew, you've written about ranked choice voting in your most recent book. There we go, Forward. Tell us, in your view, what are the big benefits of moving to this system?
Well, thanks, Tom. Shout out to Rob Richie, who I consider my ranked choice voting boss. The key date was 1992. Can you believe Rob's been working on this since 1992? His time has come. 30 years later. Most of us have not been in this for 30 years. I certainly have not. Also, incredible turnout today. If people said, hey, over 100 people are going to want to talk about ranked choice voting, people are like, what? I'm coming to California tomorrow myself to watch the Super Bowl, do some other fun things. I'd have the Rams winning. I know a lot of you are probably, not necessarily Rams fans, Niners and all that. But I'm on my way out there. California is like a very, very special place. And I love ranked choice voting because it favors candidates who people actually like. How many of you have heard something about, hey, like, don't vote for this person because you're going to mess it up, you're going to spoil it, you're going to waste your vote. And so everything is supposed to drive you towards like this person that maybe you don't like that much, but it's less bad than the other candidate. I mean, you've all been there. We've all been there. Ranked choice voting just gets rid of that entire conversation. It's like, vote for whoever you want. You can't waste your vote. No one can bully you. Your true preferences are much, much closer to being expressed. It rewards nice people. It punishes jerks. It makes it, there was at least one woman candidate I spoke to who said she decided to run because of the dynamics that ranked choice voting enabled, because she could be agreeable and a little bit more collegial and less combative, and be like, hey, you know, I can be your second, I can be your third. And I think that's exactly what American politics needs. I think that ranked choice voting has the potential to bring our democracy back from the brink. And we are at the brink. It's very late in the day. Things are about to go south in a dramatic way over the next several years, unfortunately. But if we were to get ranked choice voting in California and a number of other key places around the country, it might keep us afloat. I mean, that's where we are right now. So I love this reform. I'm incredibly frustrated that it's not more talked about in the mainstream media. You know why? Because the mainstream media is too busy trying to piss us off at each other. It's like, hey, let's not actually fix the system so it'll work better. Let's just agitate you, and then like agitate you, and that, like, it's really painful that there's a solution right before our eyes if we can just bring it to enough people in California and around the country. So pumped to be here. And you know, like, I'm certainly not as expert as Maria or Rob in ranked choice voting. I just lost a race that used it.
Awesome. Well, not awesome that you lost, Andrew, but awesome
we
commentary.
know what you meant. We know what you meant, Tom.
On ranked choice voting. Great. Well, let's dive into some of those specifics. So, Andrew, you said, you know, one of the things that RCV does is rewards candidates that are nice and punishes jerks, I think was the word you used. Let's talk about that. Why is that? And Rob or Maria, if you want to take a stab at it first, you know, what's the dynamic? How is that actually happening?
I want to use the most prominent example of all, which is Donald Trump. If you have ranked choice voting in the Republican primary in 2016, he probably does not win, because he had 40% of people loving him and like 60% did not like him. But because the other candidates split up the 60%, he ends up winning. And he's a jerk. I think most of us would agree. So the archaic system enables the jerk to win. If you'd had ranked choice voting, then someone would have been like Jeb Bush 1, Marco Rubio 2, or whatever it was, and Trump wouldn't have been on the ballot. So if you have a better process, you get better candidates and better incentives. Sorry to jump on that question, but I just wanted to, you know, dig on Trump for a minute.
Maria, Rob?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. I mean, in my experience, just watching candidates campaigning under this system, under ranked choice voting, you know, what we need to understand is that with ranked choice voting, so many more votes are on the table, right? The old way of doing things, you're either, as a candidate, you know who your base is and you know who your opponent's base is, and everything is basically a grab for those few voters that are undecided. You need to sort of like tend the garden a little bit with your base. You completely ignore everybody else's base, and you just really concentrate on those undecided voters who are a very small percentage of the electorate usually, right? So that's, if you're spending 80-90% of your resources, your time, your people power on maybe 20, maybe 15% of the electorate, that's not particularly democratic, right? With a ranked choice voting election, candidates really need to reach beyond their base into the bases of other people, right? Because like, you want those second choice votes, you want those third choice votes. So even if you know that a voter is absolutely supporting and prefers your opponent, maybe they will give you their second choice vote. Maybe they'll give you their third choice vote. So as a candidate, you really need to expand your universe of people that you're going to be talking to, that you're going to be, more importantly, listening to, right? So this changes the tenor of campaigning 100%. If I am talking to a voter who I know prefers my opponent, my strategy is not going to be to trash talk that candidate that they prefer, because I want to find, what is the point of connection? Can I connect with this voter? Is there something that the candidate that they love and myself have in common? Is there something we've worked on together? What is the way that I can reach this voter to have them support me as their second choice vote? So, I mean, it's not all kumbaya. It's not all just beautiful, let's all get along. People definitely sometimes go negative, but there is there is a price to pay, a political price to pay to going negative, particularly on a personal attack kind of level. With, when you're personally attacking somebody's favorite candidate, you're not likely to get that person's second or third choice vote.
I don't have much to add to those great comments, but I'll say two things. One, as I first got to know Maria, as she worked in Santa Fe, as Santa Fe first fought to be able to use ranked choice voting, then used it in 2018. And sort of one anecdote stuck from me from hearing about the Santa Fe mayoral contest, first time that they used it, had a very competitive race for mayor. And they have a lot of debates, about 20 debates. And people were really, this is pre-COVID, they were very excited about just the number of people that kept coming to the debates. And the story that I was told is that people were saying, well, I kind of already knew who my first choice was, but I really needed to learn more about the other candidates because, I have other rankings and choices. And from the candidate's perspective, what that means is you're finding these opportunities to connect with candidates. And sometimes people assume ranked choice voting exists on this very simplistic linear line of like from left to right, and all the voters sort of line up in this line. But in fact, it's a much more complex, ball of voters or whatever the metaphor is, sphere, and you can find connections across what might seem sort of that simplistic ideological line. And so you need to be a candidate that learns about the voters, and the voters get to learn about you, and you can find connections, and you really see it play out in local and city elections for sure, which but some version of it I think will as we rise up, which is that it's the direct connection, either you or your campaign, that listens to people and learns and sort of breaks out of the simplistic left-right spectrum to find a connection to earn that second or third choice. And voters don't have to do that ranking, right? They're not coerced into it. So you've got to earn it as well. And that kind of really gives the voter that much more power and opportunity and for the candidates to have these positive incentives. But it's all about incentives, not mandates, right? So, candidates don't necessarily do the right thing. And so you don't always get the kind of politics that we might want, but the incentives are created by the system.
Andrew, you've run in a ranked choice voting election. As you were coming up with your campaign strategy, what was different for you, knowing that the ballots were going to be ranked? How did you approach? We know that you approach things differently. I think you approach things differently in general, but in particular, because it was an RCV election in New York, can you talk a little bit about that, your own experience?
Yeah, the New York race, there was a particular dynamic, but the single biggest shift we made because of RCV was campaigning with another candidate, Catherine Garcia, and suggesting that people should rank her second if they liked me, because I thought she was the next best candidate. And that's something you obviously can't do in a normal first past the post dynamic. So that was the single biggest innovation, I suppose, or a strategic move that we made. And it almost made the difference. I don't know if you were paying attention to that stuff, but Catherine ended up finishing a very narrow second. Here's hoping that the voters chose right here in New York. But yeah, it wouldn't have been possible in a normal process. I wish ranked choice voting was a normal process, so I shouldn't use the word normal. It wouldn't have been possible with the current archaic process.
Yeah. Andrew, you also said
you just run around calling this voting archaic voting. We can brand it. You're still using archaic voting?
Can I actually add one thing, Tom, to just the New York story, just briefly, is New York had, about 500 candidates running, not in your mayoral race, sort of, Andrew, but across all the races, right? And there was a lot of contests. These were only primaries. They didn't get to use in the general election, but it was primaries, and there were a lot of contested primaries. Public financing, very generous system where sort of a 9-to-1 match for every dollar up to a level that a candidate raised, they got 9. And so you had a lot of people running, a lot of diversity, and a lot of really fascinating races down ballot, city council contests, and the the fascinating thing was that, like say in the mayoral race that Andrews ran in, and referring to Catherine, is there were other candidates who spent a lot more money than Catherine Garcia did, and yet
Guilty as charged, Rob. Go ahead.
yeah. But some others even spent more, right? And yet she almost won. Now, how does that happen? How did all these a lot of change happen down ballot? The number of women in the New York City Council more than doubled. Never had been more than about a third, and now it's well over half. Half the city council is now women of color, most of whom are under 40. And it was a lot of people could run. No one was told to wait their turn. It sort of created this, not an exactly level playing field. It's not proportional representation, but it was a sort of an opening, a liberating of politics, and a freeing from the conventional wisdom that it's not your turn, and creating these positive incentives. And it really led to a lot of changes down ballot that a lot of people sort of miss out if they just hear the national story about, oh, who won the mayor's race, but there was a lot of other things happening in New York City.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit. Rob, you said, candidates sort of having to wait their turn. What's that dynamic, right? What does that really mean? And how does that, right, before the very first campaign ad goes out, a lot has already happened. A lot of backroom things have happened. Can we talk a little bit about that and how RCV impacts that?
Oh, well, I think what Rob was referring to in part was something that works well with RCV, which is the small dollar matching programs that exist in some races and some environments. As someone who is running, this 8-to-1 match was very, very powerful. If you said, look, just give me $50 and it means $450, anyone who wanted to support you did that math and was like, really? And you give 20, it was the same multiplier. So RCV, hand in hand with certain other measures like match donations for small donors, et cetera, really did open it up for women, for people who ordinarily would not have done the backroom deals you're talking about, Tom. Because the mechanics that you don't want is like the mockers who've been there forever being like, okay, it's your turn, and like we're going to turn it to you, and you're the only one with the resources to run. This is the norm in a lot of environments. I think we all know that. So the opposite of that is something like RCV in conjunction with some of these small donor matching programs.
Yeah, it's definitely a multiplier effect of some different changes, right? There are also a lot of open seats. They have term limits, and it was one of those cycles where a lot of seats were open, and the public financing and some really good on the ground organizing that has to happen, and candidates have to emerge and be able to earn grassroots support. But at the same time, they could just put their hat in the ring, and ranked choice voting was a very liberating piece of that. Sort of in contrast, one story from Washington State, which also has the top 2 primary that, excuse me, that California also has, is a former Democratic Party chair kind of admitted that he said he probably spent most of his time as chair going around the state telling people not to run for office because they only could have one person run. They sort of needed to rally around someone, make sure that person would advance out of the primary into the top 2. So a party where you spend most of your time telling people not to participate, that not only means that candidate doesn't get to participate, but the people who might have been informed by and mobilized and energized by that candidate, that doesn't happen either. And if you look around the country, there's a whole lot of uncontested seats effectively, or uncontested primaries, and a lot of that is no accident, and it's sort of tied to the ballot.
I'll add something to that question, which is, when you're just competing as a candidate, right, for the most votes, more votes than any other candidate, what happens is if there's more than one candidate that has a similar platform, right, that would appeal to the same kind of voter along ideological lines, or along racial lines, or along a number of different criteria, those candidates are going to split the vote, right? That's what we call splitting the vote. If you have, there's countless times when we have a community that has, like a large African-American population, and there's 3 African-American candidates and 1 white candidate. the African-American vote gets split between the 3 African-American candidates and the white guy ends up winning the race. So that is definitely, in my mind, one of the beautiful things about ranked choice voting is that anybody who has a vision for their community, who wants to put themselves in the untenable position of running for office, right? Andrew knows this. It's not particularly an easy thing to do. You can do it. If you have a vision for your community, you can do it. You're not going to split the vote. You're not going to be told by the candidate that has a bigger political machine behind them or a bigger bank account behind them that you need to drop out because you're going to siphon some votes away from them. You get the votes you get, and you never have to be bullied out of the playing field, and you still can be there. You can be on the debates. You can still share your vision. You can still be, like add to the discussion, to the dialogue about what's important for the community. So that is really important to me. Like I said, along ideological lines, but really importantly along racial lines.
Thanks, Maria. So we've talked a lot about ranked choice voting from the candidate's point of view. Let's flip it around and talk about it from the voter point of view, which we've kind of alluded to. But Andrew, you started off talking about the benefits of this by saying you get to vote for who you actually like. I think the mechanics of why that is are becoming apparent as we're talking here. But can we talk a little bit more about that? And in particular, one of the criticisms that is leveled at ranked choice voting is that voters don't understand how to rank their ballots, and they won't actually rank multiple candidates, or they'll fill out their ballots incorrectly or something like that.
Now, it turns
Can we
out
talk
that
a little bit about
the
that?
human brain is wired to order things 1, 2, 3. It's actually a very, very natural process for most all of us. And Rob knows the numbers. Rob, what percentage of New Yorkers decided to rank more than one candidate?
It was about almost 90% just in the mayoral race, and who knows?
Yeah, so that shows most people understood, because if you don't understand what's going on, like you don't know to go 1, 2, 3. And almost 80% want to do it again, which is essentially 100% someplace else, because if you get 77% of New Yorkers to like something, it's pretty good. They're kind of ornery. So it's pretty self-explanatory. People like it. There are a lot of folks that just want to try and scare you because of just inertia. Like the truth of it is that ranked choice voting favors more genuine competition, dynamism, and new entrants. Who does not like that? People who have the system figured out as it is right now. People who are just like, I don't want to have to compete for voters. That would suck. Like, I'd rather just kind of trudge through and kind of like get something done and not get something done and go to my dinners and wait for my sinecure. Like, the whole thing's like that. That's what the dynamic. And so if they try and tell you like, look, it's confusing. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I've been ordering things 1, 2, 3 since I was 4 years old. It's really such a straw man. It aggravates me, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right and well said. And if you've ever gone to a store and asked for something, they didn't have it, and you asked for something else and got it as your second choice, you just did ranked choice voting, and you didn't get under with 2 items, but you got something, and that's the gist of it. And people will try to magnify data to say things that just aren't really make sense. So that in New York City, say, 99.7% of voters in the mayoral race cast a valid ballot. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at the 0.3%. That's 1 out of 300 people in the first time out in a very diverse city where a lot of people voted by mail, where they didn't have a chance to correct any mistakes they might have made, cast a valid ballot. That's great that, that many people did, and they liked it, and they ranked, and that's a very typical experience. And that's, when you think about a reform, like part of it is that people really have to use it, and you have to have candidates make the most of it. But that's one thing that we're consistently seeing. And it just sort of stepping back for a minute, I have worked on this for a long time, and overnight success, but it is built on a lot of work. But it is become, I think, the fastest growing electoral reform in the United States, and I think it's grounded in the fact that it actually is working as as one hopes voters embrace it. You're seeing it, move in a whole lot of places. 20 Utah cities used it last year. Virginia Republicans picked their statewide nominees, and New York City and 15 straight cities that have had a chance to vote on the ballot have passed it, and nearly half of states have a bill in the legislature right now trying to move it forward. And 2 states are going to use it for president in 2024 at least, and so on. There's a lot of things happening, and it's sort of grounded in the fact that it actually really does create the conditions that voters want to see.
Andrew, I know you're going to have to leave early tonight, but before you go, you said something else really, really important. You said that ranked choice voting can help bring our democracy back from the brink, right? That's a very hefty statement. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Sure. Oh, and I'm going to depress you all, and I apologize. But we're heading for a very, very rough ride in 2024. And the integrity of our elections is being questioned very, very deeply. You have a more polarized country than ever. And believe it or not, I think our ranked choice voting is the antidote. And you need look no further than the state of Alaska that adopted ranked choice voting in conjunction with open primaries. And they all of a sudden freed up the Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski to be able to vote her conscience, which included being the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who is also up for re-election this year. Her approval rating in Alaska among Republicans was measured at 6%. It's a career ender to go against Trump in the Republican Party. But she was able to do it because now Alaska has ranked choice voting in open primaries, so she doesn't have to go through a closed party primary and lose. She can go straight to the Alaskan public. And if enough moderates in Alaska say, look, she's a good person, she's been our senator, like I want her back, then she can defy Trump and survive. And if you can do that in California and other states around the country where people can defy party orthodoxy and survive, then democracy has a chance, because people can stand up to bad leadership in their own party. And I will say one party has a bigger problem with this than the other. But even within the Democratic Party, you'd have a genuine incentive to serve the vast public instead of just the people that you need to get reelected, which typically is not the 51% of the entire population. It's like 10 to 15%. So if you had ranked choice voting in enough places, you would get better incentives, you would get rid of some of the extremes, you might actually engender real change, real representation, real democracy, and then have it so that our people feel like, okay, this represents me now, because we elected that person that I know for a fact the power brokers did not want elected. Like right now it happens so rarely, and then that person ends up just being like on the side of the machine, like trying to get something done, and the machine's just like, yeah, like we can just keep on trudging, like 80% of us are going to win our races no matter what happens. So ranked choice voting is truly, to me, the closest thing we have to an antidote that is real, that's been implemented in states and cities, and can be scaled very, very quickly. If we spent 5% of the energy that people spend yelling at each other about the problems, actually galvanizing the public around ranked choice voting, it would sweep the country like wildfire. So I'm so grateful to the activists like Maria and Rob, who've been making this case for so long. I see my purpose in American life as mainstreaming other people's great ideas. So this is someone else's great idea that I'm just going to run around being like, hey, this would bring us back from the brink of failed democracy. And people used to think I was being sensationalist when I talked like this, but now no one thinks I'm being sensationalist because it's unfortunately unfolding before our eyes.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And I don't know when you're going to have to leave, but I'm really so appreciative of all the things that you're doing to help people around the country, and zooming into to state organizing meetings and helping charter commission efforts, and joining calls like this, and of course, having your bigger platforms as well. So thanks so much.
Of course, I love activists. You all are incredible. Let's go. Let's go, Cal RCV. Let's go level up California. I know some of the people who are organizers. You could not find a better group of people. So, let's get behind them and give them what they need. Appreciate you all. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks,
Thank
Better
you,
than
Andrew.
CNN, Tom. Better than CNN. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. So, yeah, super happy that we could have Andrew even for a limited amount of time. And let's keep talking a little bit more about some of the benefits. And, so we've been talking about big picture things, big advantages to candidates and to voters and to democracy overall by ranked choice voting. We also know that it has really practical, down to earth implications, like how much it costs to run elections, how much it costs to be a candidate. And I actually want to turn to one of the audience questions. So some of our questions were coming in before we even started. When people were registering, they were able to ask questions, and we've got live ones coming in the chat as well. It's a reminder to everybody, go ahead and type your questions into to Guy Camilleri, our Q&A person tonight. But Edward Earl asked a question, very straightforward. Does RCV cost more than standard ballot elections?
Well, I'll say this, sort of depends on the context. What it's often doing is, or being considered for, is when you're replacing 2 rounds of voting and folding that into one. And whenever that's happening, whatever transitional cost there might be to make sure you have the right software and the introductory voter education work or so on, very quickly the returns come in from just not having to run 2 elections. That's just from the taxpayer side. Of course, that means all the candidate expenses, the time, and so on. So the sort of shorter, cheaper, better election theme has been very key. And there's more than 50 cities that have moved to ranked choice voting, and a lot of them have done it that way. When you're replacing a plurality system, first past the post, just one round, so adding ranked choice voting, you're not saving money. There might be some transitional costs, but then it's essentially about the same cost as what it would have been before. I know Maria has a lot of community experience and might have some more to add to that.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Rob said just now. I think that it's important also to consider the cost to the candidates as well, right? So there's the administration of the election that can be extremely expensive. We were advocating for the city of Albuquerque here in my state of New Mexico to move to ranked choice voting. This is it's a big city for New Mexico standards, but it's a fairly small city overall. And they have a runoff system, and the cost to run a runoff election is the same as it is to run the first round, right? So for a city like Albuquerque, the last time they had an election, they had a runoff for just 2 council races, so just in 2 districts. But because Albuquerque has voting centers across the city, you can vote in any voting center that you like. The cost was the same. So they spent, $1.5 million for that runoff election for, pretty small city, money that could have been well spent doing something else, right? They could have saved that money by having that runoff process happen in the same ballot that you use on the first round. So there's that administrative cost. For candidates, we talked about this, we touched on this a little bit. Ranked choice voting really incentivizes candidates to talk to voters, right? That's the main thing. So we see that often candidates that prioritize their field, paying people to canvass, to go door to door, to talk to people, those sort of expenses have a lot better return than having really expensive ads, particularly those negative ads. So it's sort of like a prioritization of resources. that can be less expensive for candidates if they do it smartly.
Just adding a couple more things on top of that, which is just thinking about California. San Francisco was the first major city in the United States in the modern era to go to ranked choice voting, and they were replacing an old December runoff system. There's different ways of having 2-round systems, but they'd have their first round in November, then a runoff in December. And if it wasn't for mayor, turnout would just plunge, in that sort of holiday time runoff. That, by the way, is pretty common around the country. Like congressional primary runoffs, we've looked at, more than the last 200, and the turnout decline has been on average about 40% drop in those. But from a money perspective, what the San Francisco Ethics Commission found is that independent expenditures overwhelmingly spent for negative attacks were quadrupling in runoffs. So when it was just one-on-one, you just come in with the money to pummel the person that you don't like, because it's just a zero-sum choice. And if you can make someone go down, then it just helps the other side, which kind of creates that extra power for money. And then the other thing that's sort of California specific, though, is just thinking about, say, the conversations going on in San Jose and San Diego. Those are two major cities in California that are looking to join a lot of the other California cities that are starting to move to ranked choice voting. But what they would be replacing is a March 1st round in 2024, twinned with the presidential primary, and then an 8-month runoff before the November general election. So, candidates, they can't pay themselves from their campaign fund. Like, so if you're a wealthy person, you can volunteer to run, for a year for office. But if you're a more normal person, and like asking that person to campaign without being able, to get any income for like a year and a half or whatever it might be, like that's a real hit on people. So being able to kind of focus the election, allow candidates and voters to concentrate their effort toward one higher turnout election with all the positive incentives we talked about earlier is, such a nice option to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. So cost, certainly in the long run, even in the short run, can be advantageous for when cities or any other level of government goes to ranked choice voting. So Rob, you talked a little bit about San Francisco. That's a good segue. Let's talk specifically about California, because we're here as a California organization. And so we've got ranked choice voting used in San Francisco, in Berkeley, in Oakland, and in San Leandro, all Bay Area cities here, but all of them have been using ranked choice voting for over a decade at this point. And they've been a great source of a lot of the data that we have on the use of single winner ranked choice voting in the United States, which is, as a Californian, I'm really happy. And as a Bay Area person, I'm really happy about that. And more cities have adopted ranked choice voting or are going to start using it later this year. In California, Eureka, Albany, Palm Desert are all going to start using ranked choice voting here in the near future. I'd love to talk a little bit about cities in California and some of the dynamics as to why cities have chosen to go to ranked choice voting, how they've gone about this, right? These are sort of practical things for us as advocates who want to see ranked choice voting get used in more places. What are some of those dynamics that are happening in cities, and how does ranked choice voting actually get adopted?
It's interesting. And Maria will have some great anecdotes and stories to add to this, but I'll just sort of share like a common theme is that there is a problem that gets better when you add in ranked choice voting. Like there's something that can be fixed and improved, right? And if you can make that connection to the problem and make a clear case that ranked choice voting is an improvement, you can actually get a lot of support from within current elected bodies, charter commissions. More than 50 cities, as I mentioned earlier, have moved to ranked choice voting, and I think all but 2 came through the city council itself or a charter commission. And so that was true for San Francisco, San Leandro, Oakland, Eureka, Berkeley. They all were placed on the ballot ultimately by the elected body itself. So that takes work, right? Because they're changing their own system. The voters had to confirm it with a charter amendment change. These are all cities there that are charter cities, and that's the only cities in California that are permitted to go to ranked choice voting right now. But they all had sort of a case to make. That wasn't always the same case, right? They were actually different things that they were replacing, but there was sustained engagement by kind of a motivated set of reform-minded people that found allies on the elected body and kind of built from there. Sometimes a charter commission had kind of instigated it, but it was, it really has to go through the body. And but once it gets to voters with that combination, like if there's a problem to fix, the elected body's been persuaded, it's a very powerful instrument on the ballot with an overwhelming success rate. And I think those ballot measures in California that have happened were all of them really big wins, most of them, if not all of them. San Francisco was probably the closest, and that was the first one in 2002. And that was a real lift. The first use in the state, didn't have the voting equipment ready, because you had to kind of bust through that election administration regime. And it was outspent by some concerned opponents who thought it might shake up a status quo they were familiar with. Yet it did win with about 54%. But I think Oakland had about 70%, Eureka over 60%, Berkeley over 70%. And San Leandro did a kind of a two-step thing of creating a charter amendment that just said it had to be a majority system, runoff or ranked choice voting. That won big, and then the council has the right to choose one of those systems. But anyway, that was sort of the process in California, and some version of that's happened most elsewhere. But Maria, what's been your insights to all that?
Well, I hesitate to speak too much about the California experience since I haven't really been working in California. I did get introduced to ranked choice voting originally because I'd moved to Oakland right before a mayoral election, and I had gotten a new job, and the first day at my job was to go see a mayoral debate that was coordinated by some community leaders that I was to be working with. And that was my introduction to ranked choice voting, and that was my eye-opening experience there, not just about how mechanically it works, but also just the civic engagement part of this, right? These were a couple hundred residents of East Oakland, which, for those of you who know Oakland, East Oakland is, kind of like a rough part of town and has lower voter turnout than other parts of Oakland. But these community leaders were there. They understood exactly what was going on, and the power that they had as community members to push the candidates to go beyond just platitudes on that debate stage, and set some rules for the candidates. And it was cool. And I was immediately intrigued, right, by this system of voting. It made sense to me. What I'll say about California, sort of like looking forward, is that I think that with ranked choice voting right now, we're seeing kind of like a critical mass moment where, there's like a city, there's a couple of cities, there's like 3-4 cities, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a lot more. And I think that's where California is right now. We've had those 4 Bay Area cities using ranked choice voting for over a decade. We're going to get a couple more this year. And I bet you that, my sort of prognostication is that in the next 10 years, we'll probably have like 10 more California cities using it. There's just a lot of momentum, and California seems to be in the middle of that.
Yeah, by the way, I hope that's an undercount, Maria.
Me too.
And that's what the California RCV Coalition is working really hard to do, is have that be 20, 40, 60 cities. And Also look at making ranked choice voting available to all California cities. Rob, you alluded to this briefly, and I want to cover it. It's a really important dynamic here in California. So a fair number of us on this meeting tonight are probably familiar with some of the home rule bill efforts that have happened in California and that have been met by governor vetoes on a few occasions. And so would love to talk about that a little bit, the dynamics behind that, and how we think it's best to move forward, given that Governor Newsom has also vetoed a bill that would have allowed general law cities that don't have their own charter to actually choose to use RCV if they want to.
Yeah. Well, I want to do a little shout out. I see a few familiar names from Californians for Electoral Reform: Steve Chesson, Joan Strasser, and I'm sure others, C.T. Weber and others. There's been some people who have been working on these issues for a long time. One frustration, but it's sort of like success, and then not quite to the finish line, is that 3 times, actually, the Schwarzenegger, Jerry Brown, and now Gavin Newsom, there's been a bill to just allow general law cities, which would open up to all the municipalities in California to be able to use ranked choice voting, which would also create real good conversations around enforcement of the California Voting Rights Act. I think we're going to get into proportional ranked choice voting in a little bit, but that is a very sensible remedy for racial minority voting rights and the problem of minority vote dilution, and was the real impetus for why Albany had the conversation about this and going to proportional ranked choice voting, and California, Palm Desert as well. That could happen a lot more if this general law city change was made. And just bad luck in some ways in each one. Each one had to do a lot of really good work getting through the legislature. The legislators representing the cities with ranked choice voting, I think in all 3 of those instances, were really strongly supportive. So the ones with the most direct experience, and just happened to hit dynamics with governors that didn't agree. And Gavin Newsom just he was on the other side of the fence when ranked choice voting was passed in San Francisco, and sort of hadn't seemed to sort of get over that initial opposition that he had. And I suspect Jerry Brown might have been in a similar place when he was mayor of Oakland when it came to Oakland, and just sometimes you hit the bad luck of them, and maybe they're some of their advisors who for some reason make a decision not to support it. It obviously doesn't stop a lot of cities being able to go to ranked choice voting, but it is something that has been a frustrating obstacle. But but to the credit of the organizers, and because in each instance there was like a lot of organizations that came in behind it, so I think a testament to the fact that there are a lot of stakeholders who are ready to be allies in this effort.
And I mentioned earlier that the cities that have already adopted RCV in California, we've got some great data on them. It's the same kinds of dynamics that we saw in New York City, right? New York City was a much bigger implementation of ranked choice voting because it's such a big city. Can we talk a little bit about some of those dynamics here in California that we've seen? Anything that stands out in your mind in terms of candidate advantages, representation of minority voices and voters, things like that come to mind?
Maria, do you want to sort of talk some about some of the experiences that you've seen in the New Mexico cities? Isn't the Las Cruces City Council now an all-women city council? Not that ranked choice voting made that entirely, it's happened, but I think that's true. And is there any stories you want to tell from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, Las Cruces is an excellent example. Border town here in New Mexico, they adopted ranked choice voting a couple of cycles ago. And the first election cycle, the the council became a majority Latino, which the city is. And also the median age in that council dropped by like 25 years, like on the first cycle. On the next cycle, Las Cruces has an all-female council now. They're mostly young. They're perhaps all women of color. So we can't credit the whole thing to ranked choice voting, but it has a lot to do with what has happened in that city in terms of political dynamics and who feels like they can run and who is actually a viable candidate. And we see those kind of dynamics in those cities in California, right? Like you mentioned, Tom, there's good data on those cities that has been gathered cycle after cycle, and those governing bodies look a lot more like the cities that they represent. There's more women, there's more people of color, there's younger folks serving in those positions. So it changes, right? It's not a silver bullet, and not every city's gonna perform in the same way. That there's a lot of dynamics at play, but overall we see that cities that have ranked choice voting, cycle after cycle, like those governing bodies get more diverse and they get younger and so forth. A great example of this is city of Minneapolis, right? That has been using ranked choice voting for quite some time. And before ranked choice voting, it had one of the least diverse councils in the country. And now it has perhaps the most diverse councils in the country. So there's something to be said about that. And again, ranked choice voting is not the solution to every problem. It's not a silver bullet. Not everything is going to change right away. But we see that change is consistent cycle after cycle.
No, I actually haven't seen the data from the Bay Area cities, the most recent data, but I know at least as of, a couple of years ago, there's 53 offices elected by ranked choice voting in those 4 Bay Area cities that have used it for a while. And if you can look at what they had before in those, the descriptive representation of people in those offices, the number of people of color has gone from about 40% of them to about 60%. And women have also jumped to be a majority. And but where the growth happened, we didn't look at the nature of the electorates that those candidates won in, what the demographics were of their districts, and where the really biggest change happened, where people of color started to win, because the overall number of people of color as voters was pretty constant from when they didn't have ranked choice voting, but there were the districts that were plurality white and majority people of color. That's where the biggest growth happened. And again, it's not like all white people are voting just for white candidates and all people of color are voting for people of color candidates, but that there are patterns and sort of coalition dynamics, and it was those kinds of districts that really had the biggest growth. And I think it's a sort of a demonstration of how it's just empowering voters. My wife Cynthia Terrell runs group Represent Women, and they've done a lot of really good analysis. If you go to their website about particularly dynamics for women around the country, but it's half or more, I'm pretty sure, of both mayor and city council races in all those cities using ranked choice voting are women. And again, there's other reasons why that's happening, but it has been a key part of it, and it's higher rates than non-RCV cities.
So we've talked a bit about representation, descriptive representation in particular, and the data that we have in most RCV elections in the US are data as a result of single winner RCV, also known as instant runoff voting, typically IRV, right? And there's actually been a bunch of questions tonight, and I'm excited to talk more about proportional multi-winner ranked choice voting. So let's go there. Let's talk about that. Maria, do you want to kind of you gave a early description of ranked choice voting, and you were implicitly talking about single winner ranked choice voting there. Can you talk about multi-winner proportional ranked choice voting?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This can be a topic that gets complicated to talk about, particularly if you're kind of like a policy wonky kind of person, which sometimes loses the average voter, right? The way that I talk about this is, there's a thing called a rank ballot, and it's a kind of ballot where you can rank all the candidates in order of preference. And if you're just electing one person, for example, a mayor or a governor, that person needs to get more than 1/2 of the votes to win, right? If you're electing 2 people or 3 people, let's say for a legislative body, then if you're electing 2 people, that person needs 1/3 of the, more than 1/3 of the votes to win. If you're electing 3 people, it's 1/4 of the votes to win, and so forth. So the way that I talk about it is that you either need a majority or a relative majority. So for one candidate, a majority is 1/2 plus 1. For 2 candidates is 1/3 plus 1. For 3 candidates is 1/4 plus 1, and so forth. That's the way that I like to talk about it, because to me, it's not 2 things, right? It's not single winner RCV and multi-winner RCV. It's electing people with a ranked ballot, whether you're electing 1 person, 2 people, or 3 people. There's a threshold of victory that changes depending on how many people you're electing, but the process is the same. And the cool thing about proportional representation, right? There are seats that are just going to have 1 winner, like I said, a mayor or a governor, but legislative bodies, you can elect more than 1 city council member or more than 1 House member, using the same ballot. And the cool thing about that is that as a voter, right? As a voter, I know that I have a chance to actually elect somebody that I like, because that winning threshold is lower. If a candidate needs 33% of the votes to win, I as a voter have a much better chance of getting somebody I like elected to that legislative body. And it allows for people to campaign to candidates, right? Like if it's maybe, again, along racial lines, or along maybe I'm a green candidate and I really care about environmental issues, I can campaign to folks who care about those issues and get to that 33% much easier than having to campaign sort of like to the whole electorate and get that 50% plus 1. So the way that I talk about it is, there's a ranked ballot and you get to rank the candidates in order of preference. If you're electing 1 candidate, this is the winning threshold. If you're electing more than 1 candidate, this is the winning threshold.
Let me just sort of add about what it means for our politics if and when we can win this. And there are good arguments sort of up and down the ballot. And Albany, California, did pass this form of ranked choice voting as a ballot measure with 72% of the vote. And some people, I think, on this call were part of that effort. And so voters can embrace it again with that sort of, you have to sort of attach it to a problem that you're creating a solution for. But just I'll sort of share nationally. We're all aware of the national political dynamics that we exist in right now, and the ones that Andrew rightly warned us as they're going into a very challenging period, the exceptional high level of bitter polarization and sort of lockdown aspects of the country, right? It's like, as I mentioned, there's a lot of congressional seats in California, and maybe 2 or something are going to be competitive in 2022, and that's after a redistricting commission that was doing a lot of things to try to represent California, but creating meaningful competition was not a criteria, and it's very hard to do in a single member district system. So there's a bill in Congress, the Fair Representation Act. Ro Khanna, the California congressman, is one of the sponsors of that. And there's going to be a push to try to get more sponsors on it now that we've sort of gone through this cycle of redistricting and sort of seeing what it's doing and not doing, the challenges it's creating for fair racial representation. If those follow political scene, Alabama just had a very important ruling from the Supreme Court that's going to cap the number of Black majority districts in the winner take all system in Alabama to 1, which is going to be half of the representation that their numbers really should deserve. And in a single member district system, it's easy to do that, right? You're isolating voters, you're separating them, you're creating only one person representing them, and this sort of us versus them, red, blue, white, black, Latino, what have you. There's not shared representation. There's not the opportunity for us to win and be represented together. And the Fair Representation Act would, not be a full flowering of how you can go pretty far down toward a proportion, not down, but up toward a proportional representation system. But it's one that kind of says, okay, districts have to be no more than 5 seats, using the math that Maria talked about, at least 3, but, kind of like creating a politics that would be familiar in what we ended up seeing, but just very different as far as the representational dynamics. Every one of those districts in the country, the math would be that both parties would have the number of voters necessary to win seats. So you'd have Republicans being competitive in New York City, Democrats competitive in West Texas or what have you. And you would have kind of the differences within the parties being able to kind of coexist. You would be able to have full challenges from third parties and independents and not have split votes. So David Brooks wrote the column that used the title that brought some people to this gathering, which is the Reform to Save America, and he was writing about that proposal, and I think why that speaks so powerfully to someone like David Brooks is it really speaks to the deep challenges that winner take all is creating for this country. So I think we are ready to win ranked choice voting in many places. I think we're ready to win proportional ranked choice voting in more places. But I think the conversation we need for Congress and really to kind of really change the Congress to kind of fit the goals that our constitutional founders created for the system and what we really need today is, I think, to change the winner take all system to proportional ranked choice voting. And so there is an effort to do that. It's a statutory change, and it's something that we hope to get done before this decade's over.
I'd like to add something, Tom, if I may, about proportional representation, which is the very basics of it, right? We live in a pluralistic, multiracial, multilingual society, and we have this, in Andrew's terms, archaic voting system, right? Where winner takes all, single winner districts, which means that I'll give an example. I was working with some folks in Yakima County in the state of Washington, right? Yakima County is about 50% Latino, and yet in over 100 years of the county commission there, they'd only had 1 Latino candidate elected to the commission, ever. So this is what happens when, you have like a very, very slight majority of white voters in a place like Yakima County, where, let's say 51% of the voters elect 100% of the representatives every single time. So it just goes against the whole idea of this American democracy, this experiment in American democracy that we're trying to build. It makes sense to me from a fairness perspective, a democratic perspective, that if you have, if as a Latino, I live in a city that is 30% Latino, we should get about 30% of the seats, right? If you live in a place where you're 50% of the population, you should get about half of the seats. And that is where proportional representation really gets us, right? Whether it's, again, along racial lines or along sort of like issue lines or whatever it is, if you are 30% of the population, you should get 30% of the seats or thereabouts. So it really opens up this opportunity for folks who are always losing, regardless of whether you show up to vote or not, regardless of how many election cycles happen, regardless of what proportion of the population you are representative of, you lose and you lose and you lose time after time after time. So proportional representation allows for a fair way of doing this so that people actually can have representation in their governing bodies.
Yeah, I think as you, Rob, have called it, proportional RCV, proportional representation, multi-winner RCV, right? It's got a lot of different names. It is the gold standard in how to actually run a democracy. And, we don't do it. And Maria, all the points you make are, incredibly frustrating. And I think many of us, your average citizen just shrugs and says, well, that's just how it is, right? It's always been that way. It's always going to be that way, or it's going to take another 300 years or something like that for that to change. And it's not true, right? There's a reason that things are that way. It's that the systems drive those kind of outcomes. And I also want to hit real quickly, Maria, on something you said earlier, which I really like. You said you talk about both single winner and multi-winner as, these are ranked ballots. This is how voters interact with the ballots. They vote their conscience, and the systems work very well to reflect those desires. And that simplicity of talking about both in ranked ballots, I think, is important. It's why the California RCV Coalition, why we use the name ranked choice voting so prominently, is that it has become very popular. People know this phrase, they know the acronym, right? We're moving into the mainstream with this reform. And in most places, it has meant single winner, instant runoff voting. But the Cal RCV has a position that absolutely supports proportional representation via multi-winner ranked choice voting. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means at the federal, state, and city level. So at the federal level, Rob, you talked a little bit about the Fair Representation Act. At the state level in California, can we just talk at a high level of what it will take to, and we can talk about either a single winner or multi-winner RCV in this case. What will it take to actually pass this at the statewide level in California?
It's going to take a lot of work and energy, and I think and coalition building, and I think identifying the problem that motivates people that to solve. And I think we all come to this with our beliefs of what we think is important to change, and then you just have to find others that sort of agree with you on that. I think the on paper there's a very powerful case for proportional voting in California, and then you just have to deal with the political dynamics that there is a strong majority of Democrats who control the legislature and are winning statewide elections, and will need to be convinced that at least parts of that coalition to support change. And as ranked choice voting rose from cities up to states, the first two wins were ballot measure wins, right? So Maine and Alaska both have gone to ranked choice voting, and those were citizens' initiatives. I do believe we ultimately need to figure out ways to win without the initiative at the statewide level, and there's some promising progress there. But I think it's a puzzle we're all working on together about how best to address it. I think building the building, creating those building blocks of local wins, local coalitions, building the grassroots members that I know is a real priority for Cal RCV. Those are all essential elements and pillars to that ultimate, case that you need to make to go statewide.
Yeah, I think it's also important to point out that we're very fortunate in California that we do have the opportunity to change how we vote via citizens initiative, right? And so we can get it passed through voters, and not having to go through a legislature where, as we talked about, the dynamic is, wait, you want to change, right? I know how to win under the old system. Why would I want to change, right? It takes a certain kind of politician to want to make that bold move. And so, that's part of the the inertia that holds this reform back broadly. We're getting towards the
Tom,
end.
just a very 30 seconds just to add to that. Sorry, but I'll just say really quickly. I think one potential step forward, and we're seeing this happen in some other states, but just as an example, and something the legislature might do theoretically, is to add ranked choice voting to presidential primaries. And we, a number of states used ranked choice voting for presidential primaries through the party-run decisions, and it really went quite well. But in California, in its March 2020 primary, more than 500,000 votes were cast for candidates who weren't active candidates anymore, but had dropped out after the early voters had already voted for them. That was more votes alone just in California than all the votes that were invalidated from people making mistakes voting by mail in the whole presidential primary season across all the states. Just that alone in California. So if you care about early voting and you care about voting rights, and that's a real problem to fix. Just presidential primaries, it doesn't affect other offices yet in California, but that would be statewide, and I think that's an example of a change that might be an earlier win that could be possible in California.
Last question, and this is a doozy. So we've seen a lot of adoption of single winner ranked choice voting in the US, not very much proportional representation. Why do you think that is? What do you think needs to change in that dynamic? And I'll ask one other key question, which is, what's your take on whether voters need to get familiar with ranked ballots using single winner ranked choice voting, since that is the more common, before they'll be ready to move on to proportional representation? What's your thoughts on that? Maria, you want to go first?
Yeah, and I'll push back on that thinking. I mean, again, this goes back to what we were talking at the beginning of this conversation, which is the resistance to adopting and implementing ranked choice voting is often that it's too confusing and voters just won't get it, right? Voters are really smart, and I think that that line of argument is frankly really classist and really ageist and really racist. Ultimately, voters can understand ranked choice voting, and I don't think that it's a problem for them to, I don't think that we need to assume that voters are only smart enough to understand single winner, and then we can graduate them into a deeper understanding of multi-winner. I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it. Where I think that the sort of like the mistake, the tactical mistake that has been made and is still continues to be made, is that these efforts of reform are usually led by policy people who are sort of disconnected from the electorate. They're leading from sort of like a political science, what makes sense, kind of like good common sense, good government reforms, rather than leading from like a values place that is what voters connect to. So I think that, much of the work that I do is just talking to people, working with folks who are on the ground, community organizations that work directly with people, with voters. And it's not difficult to talk about this. Again, if you just talk about listen, this is the advantage of a ranked ballot. You can actually vote for who you want and your vote is not wasted. Voters really connect with that kind of message, right? You don't need to get into the weeds with voters about tabulation or about algorithms or about, thresholds of victory and stuff like that. It's on the values, and the values are the same really for using a ranked ballot and for just having an election system, electoral system that is more fair and where voters feel like their vote is going to count. So they're incentivized to show up, where candidates are incentivized to talking to voters. I think that we, as a field of reformers, we need to start talking about a ranked ballot for both multi-winner and single winner. And just pretend that there's no difference. Like, it just depends on what kind of body we're talking about. It's the same for voters. It really is.
Rob, anything to add real quickly?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of wisdom there, and I just think the best learning is just getting out there and connecting with people and trying to make the case in your community, right? And so part of that is just getting numbers and getting people sort of having the conversation. I do think on the exciting side of this is, particularly at that local level, it doesn't take a whole lot of people who are mobilized by this to start making a difference wherever they are, because usually there's something that could be better in city government and county government. And so I think that we just have to keep exploring and finding out what the problem is that we're fixing, that others in the community agree with you on, and then kind of build around that. But I think I certainly expect to see a lot more uses of proportional RCV. It certainly should be used a lot more often in voting rights cases. The California Voting Rights Act has resulted in, scores and scores of cities and school boards changing their government, and a lot of those could have gone to proportional RCV with like just a little tweaks in the state law might have made that a lot easier. But that was why Albany and Palm Desert have made the change, and a lot more places could do it just for that reason alone.
All right, well, we have got 2 minutes left. I think we could go on for quite a bit longer. I hope everybody has found this conversation as enlightening as I have. Rob and Maria, I want to thank you so much for spending some time here tonight. Hopefully everyone else agrees that it was great to have you. Really appreciate it. And Andrew, of course, had to leave early, but so glad to have him out there, as he said, taking other people's great ideas and popularizing them. I think it's phenomenal that we're having the moment that we are, and we're just getting started with this reform. I do want to talk real quickly, do a couple of plugs, talk about upcoming events for the California RCV Coalition. Make sure to go to calrcv.org. We have a statewide meeting happening 1 week from tonight at 7 o'clock. It'll also be on Zoom. And in that meeting, we're going to be talking more about what the CalRCV Coalition's strategy is to bring RCV to more cities and statewide. The short answer is we don't have all the answers yet, by the way. It's going to be, Rob, as you said earlier, it's going to take a lot of coalition building, a lot of energy over a lot of time, which is why I also want to appeal to everybody to step up, volunteer with both Level Up California and the California RCV Coalition. You can sign up on our respective websites to show interest in volunteering. They're in the chat. Thank you, Sarah. You can go ahead and do that. There's a lot of different things that we need to have happen, from canvassing and tabling at campuses and at farmers markets and at flea markets and other events, to hosting house parties, to being speakers about ranked choice voting here in California. So I encourage everyone to get involved, and also want to hand it over to Sean and Sarah to wrap us up for tonight.
Thank you, Tom. I want to again thank all of our panelists and the mountain of effort they've given towards passing RCV and developing just the body of content of ranked choice voting. I also want to thank Tom. That includes you. You're one of the panelists. We're glad to have had you here moderating our events and all the work you've done for Cal RCV. Getting involved with Cal RCV would be great for California. You can also get involved with Level Up California. Our website was already given in chats. Sarah, you can tell us about social media.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you so much. At one point, we broke 100 people, and that's crazy and unprecedented. And it was great to have so many people on the call. Don't let this be the end of your work towards ranked choice voting. follow us on social media, visit our websites, get involved, volunteer, tell your friends. That's the best way to continue the conversation, is to literally have this conversation with people that you know. So you can follow us, Level Up California, on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook. You can also follow Cal RCV. We have all of our social media handles on the screen right now. Policy Nerd Nights also has their own little social media presence, so you can follow us as well at Policy Nerds. And stay tuned on both of our websites for upcoming events. That's all I have. Thank you guys so much.